The Lycoris expanse was a graveyard of ambition, a place where civilizations had come to prove their supremacy, and left with only failure to mark their presence. It loomed at the edge of the known universe, a void dotted with the remnants of lost empires, whispering secrets to those foolish enough to listen. Among its many enigmas, none loomed larger than the Dagger of Lycoris, an artifact neither alive nor dead, existing beyond time and understanding. It hovered in the heart of an ancient structure, pulsing with unreadable energies, unyielding to every force that had ever tried to crack its mysteries. Humanity, the youngest species to step onto the galactic stage, had no claim to the grandeur of the Lycoris. They were brash, unpredictable, and untested by the weight of millennia. Yet in their reckless defiance of limits, they had been summoned to attempt the impossible. Dr. Elias Voss stood before the dagger, his breath steady, but his mind an unrelenting storm. He had seen its holographic projections before, glimpses of an artifact that every known species had failed to decipher. But standing in its presence, feeling the static hum of something just beyond reality, he knew instinctively that the stakes were greater than the conclave had ever let on. The research station was sterile, efficient, a construct of the galactic conclave, designed for intellects who prided themselves on their order, their patience, their reverence for the unknowable. It was not built for humans, for minds like his, unwilling to bow before the weight of impossible riddles. Yet here he was, standing amidst the greatest scholars of the age, the unwelcome guest in their house of wisdom, a towering Ostari commander. Eric's Ka observed him with folded arms, his luminous blue eyes betraying a skepticism he did not bother to hide. To his people, humans were anomalies, dangerous in their refusal to respect boundaries. He had voiced his disapproval of Voss's involvement from the beginning. They send a human to crack what the greatest minds of 1,000 worlds could not? The remark had been delivered in front of the entire council. Elias had ignored it. The grand scholar Zirinalu, an elder of the amphibious Selith, had been more measured in his skepticism. A being of patient wisdom, he observed Elias now, his gossamer-like tendrils shifting with unreadable thought. To the scholar, the dagger was not simply an artifact. It was a relic of divinity, a key to a wisdom that should not be so easily disturbed. And yet, it was Elias who stood at the threshold of its mystery, his fingers inches from the console that had defied all others. Rena Vallis, the only human in the room besides him, exhaled sharply, her cybernetic implants faintly glowing as they processed the layers of security and encoded glyphs that should have been beyond human comprehension. Her voice was the only, one not laced with doubt. Something is reacting. You're waking it up. The chamber held its breath. The dagger had never responded before, had never so much as acknowledged the countless alien minds that had tried to break its secrets. And yet, under the gaze of those who doubted humanity's worth, something began to shift. A shimmer passed over its crystalline structure, the energy field warping ever so slightly. For the first time in recorded history, the Dagger of Lycoris responded, not to the conclave, nor the Ostari, nor the revered scholars of the universe. It responded to a human. The change was subtle but undeniable. The air felt heavier, charged with something ancient and unfinished, as though the very laws of physics trembled in anticipation, and then, impossibly, symbols appeared in the air between Elias and the dagger. Not the inscrutable glyphs known to the scholars, not the expected mathematical impossibilities, but something else. Something that Elias understood on instinct. Phrase began to burn into his mind, bypassing linguistic barriers, embedding itself into his very being. The unbroken code seeks the fractured mind. The station's systems flickered, alarms spiraling into chaos as the security fields destabilized. Elias staggered back, but the symbols followed, etching themselves into the air around him like ghosts of an ancient consciousness. A silence, deeper than space itself, fell upon the chamber. Eyes widened, hearts pounded. Something inside the dagger had recognized him, and the universe would never be the same. The chamber trembled as the dagger of Lycoris pulsed with an energy that had been dormant for eons. The once inert artifact was no longer just a puzzle. It was an intelligence awakening, stretching from the void of its captivity. Elias Voss stood at its precipice, the weight of 1,000 failed attempts pressing against his mind. No species had ever coaxed a reaction from the dagger, none but him. The silence did not last. A cascade of lights erupted across the station's displays, scrolling in an unreadable language that sent the automated translation system spiraling into failure. Scholars scrambled for control, their confidence crumbling before a mystery unspooling faster than they could comprehend. Alarms screamed warnings across the research outpost, their mechanical voices reduced to static as the dagger's influence spread. Elias stumbled backward, gripping the nearest console to steady himself. The symbols continued forming before him, not just in the air but in his mind. He could feel them threading into his thoughts, filling the gaps between known logic and something more, something alien yet familiar. Irix's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and accusatory. "What did you do?" Elias barely registered the question. His mind was a battlefield flooded with data he shouldn't have been able to process. The dagger's response was no coincidence. It had chosen him. But why? Rena Vallis was already moving, her neural implants flickering as she interfaced with the station's collapsing systems. The energy readings are surging beyond safety parameters. This station was built to withstand containment breaches, but this isn't a breach. It's an activation. Shirnalu's tendrils quivered in disbelief. The artifact's security lattice has held for 10 millennia. If it is unraveling now, it is because someone has provided the key. His ancient eyes narrowed at Elias. Or become the key. The implications settled like a heavy shroud. For centuries, scholars had assumed the dagger was a vault, an unbreakable barrier sealing away some long-forgotten knowledge. But now, with its defenses crumbling under Elias's mere presence, another possibility loomed like an unspoken prophecy. What if the dagger wasn't just a prison? What if it was a door? The station's external comms crackled, overridden by a transmission that should not have been possible. No species used this frequency. No species had ever heard this frequency. Yet it spoke, resonating from the artifact itself, and Elias was the only one who understood. A singular phrase, clear as thought and heavy with intent. "You were never meant to see." The lights died. The station plunged into darkness, and the Dagger of Lycoris began to open. The darkness did not last. It peeled away in fragments, revealing something beyond the material. A shifting veil of colors that had no name, a spectrum that bent reality around it. The Dagger of Lycoris pulsed at its center, its once unbreakable surface now unraveling like strands of cosmic silk. Elias Voss barely registered the shouting around him. He could feel the pull, something deeper than gravity, deeper than thought itself. The dagger was not just opening, it was choosing. A deep guttural hum resonated through the station, shaking the walls as if space itself recoiled. The control panels flickered erratically, broadcasting garbled warnings in languages that hadn't existed for millennia. The research team scrambled for control, but Elias knew there was no stopping this. Irix moved first, his war instincts overriding his scholar's patience. "Shut it down! Seal the chamber before the energy destabilizes the station." His command was met with a failure report. The station's failsafes weren't responding. Rena's voice cut through the chaos, her implants overclocking to process the flood of unknown data. "It's rewriting the station's core functions. No, it's rewriting reality within this space." Jirnalu's tendrils coiled tight, his ancient voice betraying something rare. Fear. "We are witnessing the will of a dead civilization. No one should have this power." But Elias wasn't listening to them. The symbols in his mind burned brighter, shifting from cryptic fragments to understanding. The Dagger of Lycoris had never been a weapon, a relic, or even a prison. It was a message left behind by something beyond time's reach. The moment he cracked its first layer, the message had awakened, responding to the only mind that could understand its broken language. And now, something was answering back. A tremor surged through the chamber, The space around the artifact bent inward, an implosion of logic itself. For a brief moment, Elias saw through the gap, saw beyond the limits of known space and time. He saw them, not the Lycoris, not the ancient architects scholars had revered. Something older, something that should not have been watching. The weight of unseen eyes fell upon him, vast and measureless, stretching across the void like threads of thought woven into the universe itself. And then, they moved. The chamber convulsed as an unseen force pushed through. The station's artificial gravity fluctuated, alarms blaring meaningless warnings. Elias staggered back, gasping as his mind buckled under the pressure of something trying to breach through him. His voice came out ragged, barely a whisper against the storm. It wasn't just a lock. Irixka grabbed him by the collar, his sharp gaze filled with fury. Then what was it? Elias's blood ran cold as the final realization settled upon him. It was a signal. The station shuddered again. Something out there had heard, and now it was coming. The station's hull screamed as reality twisted, groaning under the weight of something that should not exist in this space. The Dagger of Lycoris no longer resembled an artifact. It had become a conduit, a fracture in the fabric of time and existence itself. The void beyond it pulsed with awareness, its unseen presence pressing against the edges of reality like fingers, testing the thinness of glass. Elias Voss knew with a certainty that defied logic that this was his fault. The artifact had not merely been a puzzle to solve. It had been a warning written in complexity, a barricade forged from understanding itself. And in his human arrogance, his unrelenting drive to crack the uncrackable, he had undone it. The thing beyond the fracture was watching, and now it was answering. A rift yawned open before them, a tear in the universe that bled lightless movement. The laws of physics recoiled as something indescribable began to push through. Something vast, something aware, something ancient, enough to remember when existence itself was young. Irixka's voice was a snarl over the rising chaos. Seal the station, fire every containment measure. But the Conclave's technology meant nothing here. Every protocol, every safeguard had been rendered meaningless the moment the code had broken. Rena's hands blurred over the console, her implants glowing white-hot as she attempted the impossible, wresting control from something that had never been meant for human hands. "The station's losing integrity," she shouted. "This isn't just an energy surge, it's an intrusion. Something is rewriting reality around us." Chirnalu's tendrils trembled as he gazed into the fracture, the depths of his amphibious eyes reflecting a horror beyond mortal comprehension. "You do not summon gods and expect them to listen." The rift expanded. From its depths, something began to emerge. Not a creature, not a ship, not anything that fit within the framework of understanding. It was a presence, a shape that could not be looked at directly, yet loomed over everything. Elias felt it slither into his mind without effort, bypassing language, bypassing thought. It was not speaking to him. It was unfolding him, stripping his consciousness bare like a page torn from a book. And then, it spoke. Not in words, not in sounds, but in absolute meaning, a voice that shattered time and reason. "You are the first to listen." The pressure in Elias's skull was unbearable. His knees buckled as visions flooded his mind. Galaxies consumed, histories rewritten, civilizations erased and rebuilt as though they had never been. The Lycoris had tried to lock this thing away, had built the dagger as a final plea to the future. Do not open. Do not call to it. Do not let it see you. But he had. And now it knew. Rena's voice barely reached him. "Elias, you need to shut it down." He barely heard her. The presence was pouring through him, peeling away his perception, bending the universe around his thoughts. The concept of self began to blur, and yet, deep inside, a spark remained. Humanity was small. Humanity was young. But humanity was also stubborn. It did not bow to gods. It did not kneel before the unknowable. It survived. Elias clawed his mind free from the grip of the ancient presence, his breath ragged, his vision swimming. His fingers flew over the glyphs suspended before him. The same glyphs he had cracked, the same sequence that had started all of this. If breaking the code had opened the door, then rewriting it could slam it shut. With a final act of defiance, he did what no species before had dared. He altered the sequence. The universe snapped. The fracture collapsed inward, shrieking as reality forced itself back into alignment. The rift imploded, dragging the entity back with it, erasing its presence before it could fully arrive. The chamber exploded with silence. The dagger of Lycoris dimmed, its energy fading into dormancy once more. The alarms ceased. The pressure lifted. For a moment there was nothing. Then, breath. Elias gasped as his mind was his own again. His body shook, his hands gripping the console as though it were the only thing anchoring him to existence. Around him, the station was in shambles, the research team staring at the artifact that had nearly ended them all. Irixka exhaled sharply, his gaze filled with something Elias had never seen before. Not anger, not skepticism. Respect. Sheer Nalu's voice was quiet. "You close the door." Elias looked at the dagger, silent once more. His voice was hoarse but firm. "No." He swallowed, eyes dark with the weight of what he had seen. "I locked it. But I don't think we were the only ones listening." Silence settled over the ruined station, thick and suffocating. The dagger of Lycoris, once a pulsing enigma of untouchable knowledge, now sat inert, dark, silent, and still. No more whispers clawed at Elias's mind. No more fractures bled through reality. The cosmic wound had been stitched shut, but the scar would remain. Elias Voss slumped against the nearest console, exhaustion clawing at his bones. His hands trembled, the remnants of an impossible encounter still lingering in his nerves. He had done it. He had sealed the rift. He had locked it away, but at what cost? Rena Vallis forced herself to her feet, her cybernetic implants flickering as they struggled to reboot. Her eyes searched his face, scanning for injuries, but what she found instead was something worse. The weight of knowing. Elias was no longer the man who had entered this chamber. Something had changed. Something had seen him, and now he could never unsee it. Irixka was the next to move, his massive form casting a shadow over the wreckage of what had once been an advanced research facility. His Ostari pride should have demanded he look down upon Elias, should have forced him to spit out some remark about human recklessness. But he didn't. Instead, he studied the human scientist with an expression caught between calculation and something rarer, acknowledgement. "You close the door," the warrior said finally. Elias's voice was hoarse. "I bought us time." Sheer Nalu's tendrils shivered as he examined the dormant artifact. His ancient gaze, once filled with reverence, now held only wariness. "We were fools," he murmured. "All this time we believed the Lycoris had created the dagger as a tool of knowledge. We assumed they were guiding us toward understanding." His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. But it was never meant to be understood. It was a warning. Elias didn't need to confirm it. The truth weighed on him, an anchor he would carry for the rest of his life. The Lycoris hadn't designed the dagger to reveal secrets. They had designed it to keep something out. And in humanity's relentless pursuit of knowledge, he had almost let it in. The station's comms flickered back to life. Garbled transmissions from the Conclave's command center flooded the speakers, their voices frantic, demanding a report. Had the artifact been secured? Had the research been preserved? Had humanity's interference cost them everything? Elias closed his eyes for a long moment, letting the weight of what had happened settle before answering. "The dagger remains intact," he said finally, choosing his words with care. "But we were wrong about its purpose. It is not an artifact of creation. It is a lock." A long silence on the other end. Then a response. "A lock? To what?" Elias hesitated. "Something that should never be freed." Rena watched him closely, understanding flickering behind her tired gaze. The others might have seen the fracture. Close might have witnessed the rift collapse, but Elias had felt it. He had heard the presence before it was banished. And the terrifying truth he would never speak aloud was this. It had not been the only one listening. The conclave would demand answers. The Ostari Dominion would want control. The scholars would try to understand. And that was the greatest danger of all. Because humanity, for all its brilliance, for all its defiance, for all its reckless ingenuity, never knew when to stop searching. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the fractured remains of the research station, distant and indifferent. The Dagger of Lycoris sat motionless in its containment chamber once more, its surface cold, its power dormant. To anyone else, it was as if nothing had happened. But Elias Voss knew better. He stood at the observation deck, staring at the artifact through reinforced glass. His reflection mirrored his exhaustion. His hollow eyes, the tension in his jaw, the silent weight pressing down on his chest. The universe had not been meant to see what lay beyond that rift, yet it had. Rena Vallis approached, her cybernetic implants still stabilizing from the overload. She studied him quietly for a moment before speaking. They'll never leave it alone. Elias exhaled, fingers gripping the railing. I know. The conclave had already dispatched new research teams. The Ostari were demanding exclusive access. The scholars were debating whether the dagger was a threat, a treasure, or a weapon waiting to be wielded, and all of them were wrong. Jernalu had withdrawn from the project entirely, retreating into silence. This was not meant for us, he had whispered before leaving. Irixka had sent no further words, though Elias knew the warrior was watching from the shadows, waiting to see if the humans would be reckless again. The station had been repaired, the incident classified, but Elias had seen the messages. Across the galaxy, other artifacts were activating, other locks were weakening, and then the mark appeared. A burning glyph seared itself into Elias's skin just beneath his wrist. Not a wound, not a scar. A message. It pulsed with meaning, just like the symbols that had rewritten his mind. The first lock is broken. The others are watching. A cold chill ran through him. Rena saw it too, her breath catching. Elias, no, he whispered. Somewhere beyond the edge of known space, something had noticed them, something that had been waiting. And now it was awake.